My name is Commander Sarah Mitchell, and I was standing in the shadows of Arlington National Cemetery when the honor guard approached my father's casket with a precision that made my heart stop. What happened next would shatter my family's understanding of everything they thought they knew about duty, sacrifice, and the daughter they had cast aside. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The text message had arrived at 0430 hours on a Tuesday morning, while I was reviewing classified intelligence reports in a secure facility 200 miles beneath the Nevada desert. The message was from my older brother David. Dad passed away Monday night. Heart failure. Funeral is Saturday at Sacred Heart Cemetery in Phoenix. Family has decided it's best if you don't attend. Your presence would complicate things with the other military guests who knew Dad. Please respect our wishes during this difficult time. I read those words 3 times before their meaning penetrated the controlled focus that 15 years of naval intelligence had trained me to maintain. Captain James Mitchell, United States Army, retired, was dead. The man who had taught me to navigate by the stars, to think 3 moves ahead in any situation, and to understand that some battles are won through silence rather than confrontation, had suffered a massive heart attack while I was buried so deep in classified work that the surface world might as well have been another planet. But the second part of David's message cut deeper than grief itself. My own family was excluding me from saying goodbye to the man whose values had shaped every decision I had made for the past 2 decades. They believed my military service would complicate things with other military guests who had known my father during his 25 years of Army service. The irony was suffocating. I was currently leading a joint intelligence operation that was tracking terrorist financing networks across 4 continents, work that required security clearances so high that most military personnel would never know such operations existed. My team had prevented 3 major attacks in the past 18 months, saving thousands of civilian lives. Yet my family considered my service an embarrassment that would disrupt their suburban funeral arrangements. I walked through the sterile corridors of the underground facility, past security checkpoints that required biometric identification and armed guards who nodded respectfully when they saw my uniform. None of this mattered to my family. In their minds, I was still the rebellious daughter who had chosen military service over marriage and motherhood, who had prioritized abstract concepts like duty and national security over family barbecues and holiday traditions. My commanding officer, Admiral Rebecca Torres, found me in the Secure Communications Center where I had been staring at David's message for 20 minutes without moving. Torres was one of only 12 people in the Navy who knew the full scope of my current assignment, and she could read operational stress in personnel under her command with frightening accuracy. "Mitchell, what's your status?" she asked, using the professional tone that indicated she was assessing whether I remained operationally effective or needed to be relieved of duty. "My father died, ma'am. Massive heart attack yesterday evening, Mountain Time." I maintained the controlled voice that 15 years of naval training had made automatic, even as something fundamental was breaking apart inside my chest. Admiral Torres was quiet for several seconds, understanding that losing a parent during deep cover assignment represented one of the most challenging situations that intelligence personnel could face. "Do you need emergency extraction? We can have you stateside within 8 hours if necessary." I looked down at my brother's message again, reading the words that somehow hurt more than any physical injury I had sustained during 3 combat deployments. "Negative, ma'am. The family has requested that I not attend the funeral. I am fully mission capable and ready to maintain the operational timeline." The expression on Torres's face indicated that she understood there was more to the situation, but military protocol prevented her from inquiring further, unless it affected my ability to execute my duties. "Mitchell, I've worked with you for 6 years. Your analytical capabilities and leadership under pressure have been exemplary in situations that would break most officers. If you assess that you can maintain operational effectiveness, I trust that judgment. However, if circumstances change, you will inform me immediately." "Understood, ma'am." That night, as my team prepared for an operation that would culminate 6 months of intelligence gathering across international networks, I found myself reflecting on how completely my military service had separated me from the family that had raised me to understand honor and sacrifice. The very values my father had instilled in me had led to achievements that my family not only failed to appreciate, but actively resented. Growing up in Phoenix, I had been raised in a household where military service represented the highest form of public duty. My father had served with distinction in Panama, the Persian Gulf, and Bosnia, rising through the ranks based on tactical brilliance and uncompromising integrity. Our dinner table conversations had revolved around strategic thinking, historical analysis, and discussions about honor that went far beyond personal comfort or social acceptance. My mother, Linda Mitchell, had been an Army wife who understood the sacrifices required by military families and had initially supported my decision to attend the Naval Academy. My brother David had followed a different path, completing college and building a successful accounting practice in Phoenix, while my younger sister Amanda had become a high school teacher and married her college boyfriend. Both of my siblings had chosen conventional paths that allowed them to remain close to home, build traditional families, and participate in the suburban social networks that my parents had embraced after my father's retirement from active duty. I had chosen something else entirely, something that had initially made them proud, but had gradually become a source of tension as my naval career advanced beyond their understanding or comfort level. The promotion to lieutenant commander had been the first sign that my military trajectory was exceeding their expectations. The assignment to naval intelligence had created communication barriers they found frustrating and suspicious. When I was selected for promotion to commander and assigned to lead classified operations that required extended periods without contact, the gap between my daily reality and their understanding had become unbridgeable. My family had interpreted my limited communication and irregular leave schedule as evidence that military service was fundamentally changing my character and priorities. They believed I was choosing career advancement over family relationships, using classified assignments as excuses to avoid the emotional investments that conventional family life required. The truth was more complex and more painful than they could understand. The work I was performing required capabilities and knowledge that had taken years to develop, involved protecting people who would never know they had been in danger, and provided intellectual fulfillment that civilian alternatives could not match. Each successful operation validated the personal sacrifices that military excellence had demanded, but those sacrifices had created a psychological and social distance from civilian life that my family experienced as emotional abandonment. The final confrontation had occurred during my last visit home, approximately 14 months before my father's death. My family had arranged what they described as an intervention, where David and Amanda had been enlisted to convince me to leave military service and pursue what they considered a more appropriate career path for a woman approaching 35. "Sarah, you're missing everything that makes life meaningful," Amanda had said, sitting across from me at our parents' kitchen table. "Most women your age are married with children. You're sacrificing the most important experiences of human life for this military obsession that's turning you into someone we don't recognize." David had been more direct. "I understand the appeal of military service, and I respect what you've accomplished. But there comes a point where you have to choose between career and family. You're isolating yourself from everyone who cares about you for work that you can't even discuss with the people who love you." Even my father, despite his decades of military service and his initial pride in my naval achievements, had expressed concerns about the direction my career had taken. "Sarah, your dedication to duty is admirable, and your achievements are impressive. But your mother and siblings are worried about your future. Perhaps it's time to consider transitioning to civilian work, where you can use your leadership skills without the constant secrecy and isolation." I had tried to explain that my work involved preventing terrorist attacks, protecting American interests, and serving in ways that required capabilities few people possessed or were willing to develop. I had described the intellectual challenges of complex operations and the satisfaction that came from knowing my service made a genuine difference in global security. Their response had been dismissive and condescending. My mother had suggested that I was using military service to avoid the responsibilities of normal adult life. My siblings had implied that my commitment to duty was actually selfishness disguised as patriotism. Even my father had questioned whether my dedication to naval excellence was preventing me from developing the relationships and experiences that would provide long-term happiness. The conversation had ended with my mother delivering an ultimatum that would define our relationship for the remaining months of my father's life. Choose between continued military advancement and maintaining family connections. She had made clear that my decision to accept increasingly classified assignments would result in gradual estrangement from family gatherings, holidays, and the support network that they believed I would eventually need when my military phase ended. I had chosen military service, and for 14 months communication with my family had become formal and infrequent. Phone calls had been reduced to brief exchanges about health and logistics. Holiday visits had been skipped due to operational requirements that my family interpreted as deliberate avoidance. The gap between my life and their understanding had widened until we existed in completely separate worlds. Now, as I sat in the most secure facility in the American intelligence apparatus, preparing to execute an operation that would disrupt terrorist financing networks across multiple continents, I realized that my father had died believing his daughter had chosen career over family. He had passed away thinking that the principles he had taught me about duty and service had somehow been corrupted into selfishness and emotional isolation. The pain of that realization was more devastating than any wound I had sustained during combat operations in the South China Sea. The foundation of everything I became was built on a military base in Fort Huachuca, Arizona, where I spent the first 12 years of my life watching my father demonstrate what it meant to serve something larger than yourself. Those early memories shaped every decision I would make for the next 2 decades, though my family would eventually come to see that influence as a betrayal rather than a blessing. Captain James Mitchell commanded the 111th Military Intelligence Battalion, with a leadership style that earned respect through competence rather than authority. He never raised his voice to achieve compliance, but his expectations were clear, consistent, and rooted in principles that he believed should guide every important decision in military and civilian life. His soldiers followed him not because they had to, but because they trusted his judgment and respected his integrity. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Our quarters at Fort Huachuca reflected military precision tempered with genuine family warmth. Reveille came at 0600 hours, with my father's gentle but firm wake-up call, followed by family breakfast, where he would discuss the day's plans while my mother, Linda, prepared meals that could sustain us through Arizona's demanding desert climate. These breakfast conversations became my earliest education in strategic thinking, problem-solving, and understanding how individual actions contributed to larger objectives. My father would explain military operations in terms that a young child could understand, using examples from his intelligence work to teach lessons about careful observation, analytical thinking, and the importance of accurate information in making critical decisions. When his battalion successfully completed training exercises, he would describe how thorough preparation and teamwork had contributed to success. When operations encountered difficulties, he would analyze what had gone wrong and how those mistakes could be prevented in future situations. These conversations taught me that leadership meant accepting responsibility for both successes and failures, that complex problems required systematic analysis rather than emotional responses, and that the most important decisions often involved choosing between what was comfortable and what was right. My father never presented these as abstract concepts, but as practical principles that guided his professional work and family relationships. The military community at Fort Huachuca functioned as an extended family where professional rank mattered for operational purposes but disappeared during Little League games, community barbecues, and crisis situations when someone needed help. Children learned early that their parents' military service was both a source of pride and a responsibility that sometimes required significant personal sacrifice. My earliest understanding of courage came from watching military families handle deployment separations, permanent change of station moves, and the constant uncertainty that accompanied intelligence work. These families maintained strong relationships despite geographic distance, created stability for children despite frequent relocations, and supported each other through challenges that would overwhelm many civilian communities. The most profound influence on my character development came from observing how my father approached his professional responsibilities as an intelligence battalion commander. His work required coordinating complex operations involving hundreds of personnel, millions of dollars in sophisticated equipment, and intelligence timelines that allowed no margin for error. I would accompany him to his office during school holidays and summer breaks, observing how he interacted with subordinates, managed competing priorities, and made decisions that affected numerous people in critical operations. His leadership style emphasized clear communication, thorough preparation, and taking care of the soldiers under his command before attending to his own needs. Watching my father work taught me that true leadership meant accepting responsibility for others' welfare, that effective decision-making required gathering complete information before taking action, and that maintaining high standards was essential for achieving results that justified the trust others placed in your judgment. One particular incident when I was 10 years old crystallized my understanding of military honor and its personal cost. My father's battalion had been tasked with providing intelligence support for a joint training operation with Mexican military forces near the border. The exercise was politically sensitive and required careful coordination to avoid international incidents that could complicate diplomatic relationships. 3 days before the operation was scheduled to begin, my father discovered that crucial intelligence assessments contained inaccuracies that could compromise the safety of both American and Mexican personnel. The flawed information had been provided by a senior intelligence analyst whose career would be severely damaged if the errors were officially reported. I watched my father spend an entire night reviewing intelligence files, consulting with other analysts, and preparing a comprehensive report that documented the problems while recommending solutions that could preserve the training operation's objectives. His decision to correct the flawed intelligence meant disappointing senior officers who had already committed resources to the operation, but it prevented potential casualties that could have resulted from acting on inaccurate information. The incident taught me that integrity sometimes required accepting personal and professional consequences to protect others, that doing the right thing was often more difficult than doing the convenient thing, and that military leadership demanded choosing mission success over individual comfort or career advancement. My father never explicitly discussed this situation with me, but I understood that his decision represented the kind of moral courage that military service required. His willingness to risk his own standing to ensure others' safety became a defining example of what duty actually meant when tested by real circumstances. The contrast between military and civilian approaches to community responsibility became apparent during family visits to my maternal grandparents in Tucson. The civilian environment revealed fundamental differences in how people approached relationships, responsibilities, and community engagement. Civilian neighbors seemed more focused on individual family interests, rather than collective community welfare. Professional relationships appeared more competitive and less collaborative than the military unit cohesion I had observed at Fort Huachuca. Social gatherings revolved around entertainment and status display, rather than mutual support and shared purpose that characterized military community events. My father adapted to civilian social situations with diplomatic skill, but I could observe his preference for the direct communication and clear expectations that characterized military relationships. During family gatherings in Tucson, conversations about politics, current events, and social issues revealed fundamental differences between military and civilian perspectives on duty, sacrifice, and public service. These experiences taught me that military families operated according to different values and priorities than civilian society, and that the gap between these worldviews could create misunderstanding and tension when military personnel interacted with civilian communities. The transition from childhood to adolescence at Fort Huachuca coincided with my father's promotion to major and assignment to increasingly complex intelligence operations that required extended travel and irregular schedules. His advancement within the intelligence community meant greater responsibilities and higher security clearances that limited what aspects of his work could be discussed with family members. Despite these limitations, my father continued to use his military experience as a foundation for teaching lessons about character, responsibility, and strategic thinking. He emphasized that intelligence work required combining analytical rigor with practical judgment, maintaining objectivity while understanding human motivations, and communicating complex assessments to decision-makers who often lacked technical expertise. His guidance during this formative period established intellectual frameworks and moral principles that would shape my approach to complex problems throughout my life. The emphasis on systematic analysis, careful observation, and principled decision-making became fundamental aspects of my personality and professional methodology. Most importantly, my father demonstrated that meaningful work required accepting responsibilities that extended beyond personal comfort and immediate family interests. His commitment to intelligence excellence and national security provided a model for finding purpose through service to larger objectives that protected people who would never know they had been in danger. By the time I reached high school, the values and intellectual frameworks that my father had instilled had become central to my identity in ways that would ultimately create both the greatest achievements and the deepest personal costs of my adult life. The first crack in my family's united support for my military aspirations appeared during my sophomore year at Annapolis, when what they had initially viewed as an admirable phase of personal development began revealing itself as a fundamental transformation of my character and life priorities. The United States Naval Academy had been my father's suggestion when I expressed interest in military intelligence during high school. He understood that naval intelligence offered opportunities for strategic analysis and international operations that exceeded what other service branches could provide. My acceptance to Annapolis had been celebrated as a family achievement, validation of the values and intellectual preparation that had characterized my upbringing. However, the person who returned home for Christmas break after 18 months at the academy was noticeably different from the daughter who had left Phoenix with their enthusiastic support. The changes were subtle but unmistakable to family members who had known me since childhood. My conversation style had become more direct and analytical, focused on practical outcomes rather than emotional processing. Social interactions felt less natural and more strategic, as if I was constantly evaluating situations for tactical advantages and potential risks. Even my physical posture and movement patterns reflected military bearing that seemed formal and intimidating in civilian family environments. My mother, Linda, was the first to express concern about these changes during a private conversation while helping prepare Christmas dinner. "Sarah, you seem so serious now, so focused on, I don't know, like you're always thinking about work or analyzing everyone around you. You used to be more relaxed, more fun to be around." Her observation was accurate but difficult to explain. Naval Academy training had indeed changed my approach to problem solving, social interaction, and personal relationships. The intense academic program combined with military discipline had created mental habits that prioritized efficiency, strategic thinking, and mission accomplishment over casual social engagement and emotional expression. My brother David noticed similar changes during family gatherings, particularly my reduced interest in civilian activities and social events that had previously provided shared experiences. Holiday traditions that had once been sources of genuine enjoyment now felt somewhat artificial and time-consuming compared to the purposeful activities that characterized academy life. "It's like you're always somewhere else mentally," David observed during a family dinner. "Even when you're physically here, you seem to be thinking about other things, more important things that we're not part of anymore." These early signs of divergence became more pronounced as my academy training progressed, and I began specializing in intelligence analysis. The academic coursework required mastering complex theoretical frameworks while simultaneously developing practical skills in information gathering, threat assessment, and strategic planning that civilian education could never provide. My senior thesis at Annapolis focused on analyzing communication patterns in international terrorist networks, research that required security clearances, and access to classified materials that prevented discussing my academic work with family members. The inability to share details about my studies created the first significant communication barriers between my daily reality and their understanding of my educational experience. During spring break of my senior year, the gap between my perspective and my family's expectations became openly problematic during a conversation about post-graduation plans. They had assumed that my naval service would involve relatively safe assignments that allowed regular communication and predictable leave schedules. My father, despite his military experience, seemed surprised by my interest in pursuing advanced intelligence training that would lead to overseas assignments and classified operations. "Sarah, intelligence work has changed significantly since my career. Modern operations involve greater complexity and higher risks than what I experienced. Perhaps you should consider naval positions that utilize your analytical skills without requiring such extensive travel and security restrictions." My sister Amanda was more direct in expressing family concerns about the direction my military career was taking. "Sarah, we're proud of what you've accomplished at the academy, but we're worried about how this military lifestyle is changing you. You seem less connected to family, less interested in the relationships and activities that used to matter to you. Their concerns reflected genuine care for my well-being, but they also revealed fundamental misunderstanding about the source of satisfaction and purpose that military service was providing. The intellectual challenges of intelligence analysis, the sense of contributing to national security, and the opportunity to work with highly capable people on complex problems provided fulfillment that civilian alternatives could not match. My graduation from Annapolis and commissioning as an ensign in naval intelligence was attended by my entire family, who expressed pride in my achievement while simultaneously communicating hopes that military service would be temporary and eventually give way to more conventional career choices. The graduation dinner became a defining moment that established patterns of interaction that would persist throughout my naval career. My parents and siblings expressed admiration for my accomplishments, while subtly indicating expectations that military service would eventually be balanced against personal considerations that would lead me toward civilian career paths. "We're so proud of everything you've achieved," my mother said during the celebration dinner. "This has been an incredible experience for you, and now you can use this leadership training in whatever direction you choose to take your career." The implication was clear. Military service was viewed as valuable preparation for civilian success rather than a meaningful career path in itself. They expected that the discipline and leadership skills developed through naval training would eventually be applied to civilian pursuits that allowed for normal family relationships and community involvement. My first assignment to the Office of Naval Intelligence in Suitland, Maryland, marked the beginning of work that would create an unbridgeable gap between my daily responsibilities and my family's understanding of military service. The position required security clearances that prevented discussing work details with anyone who lacked appropriate authorization, including family members who had previously been involved in all aspects of my education and career planning. The inability to share information about my professional activities created the appearance of deliberate secrecy and emotional distance that my family interpreted as evidence that military service was changing my priorities and character in concerning ways. Phone conversations became increasingly superficial and unsatisfying, as larger portions of my daily experience became classified and undiscussable. My work analyzing intelligence from the Persian Gulf region required 12-hour days, frequent weekend assignments, and irregular leave schedules that made planning family visits difficult and unpredictable. The demands of intelligence analysis during a period of heightened international tensions meant that operational requirements consistently took precedence over personal commitments and family expectations. The promotion to lieutenant junior grade after 18 months of exemplary performance was celebrated by my family with mixed emotions. They were proud of my professional advancement but concerned about the implications for my personal life and future flexibility. Their congratulations were accompanied by questions about when I might consider transitioning to civilian employment that would allow greater work-life balance. During my first extended leave period after promotion, family conversations increasingly focused on their observations about how military service was affecting my personality and life choices. They noted that I seemed more serious, less emotionally expressive, and increasingly focused on responsibilities that prevented participating in family activities and social gatherings. "You've become so dedicated to this military work that you don't seem to have time or energy for anything else," Amanda observed during a family barbecue. "When was the last time you went on a date, or had hobbies, or did anything just for fun that wasn't related to your job?" Her questions reflected genuine concern, but also revealed fundamental differences in how we understood meaningful work and personal fulfillment. The intellectual challenges of intelligence analysis, the knowledge that my work contributed to national security, and the opportunity to develop specialized expertise provided satisfaction that social activities and romantic relationships could not replicate. The gradual realization that my family's support for military service was conditional and limited by their understanding of acceptable risk and lifestyle implications became increasingly apparent during subsequent visits home. They respected military service in principle but preferred that I pursue alternatives that would provide similar leadership opportunities without requiring the total commitment that effective intelligence work demanded. By the time I was selected for promotion to full lieutenant and assignment to advanced intelligence training, the foundation was already established for the complete estrangement that would eventually exclude me from my father's funeral. The values he had taught me about duty and service had led to achievements that my family not only failed to appreciate, but actively resented as evidence that military service had corrupted my understanding of what truly mattered in human life. The final confrontation that would sever my family relationships forever occurred during Thanksgiving weekend, 2 years before my father's death, when what my family had planned as an intervention became the moment I was forced to choose between their approval and everything I had dedicated my life to achieving. I had returned to Phoenix on emergency leave, following a grueling 6-month deployment aboard the USS Hampton, a nuclear submarine conducting intelligence-gathering operations in the South China Sea. The mission had been classified at levels that prevented me from discussing any details with family members, including the fact that our intelligence work had prevented a potential military confrontation between Chinese and Philippine naval forces that could have escalated into regional conflict. The physical and psychological demands of submarine duty had changed me in ways that were immediately apparent to my family. 6 months of confinement in a pressurized steel cylinder with 140 other people, operating in complete secrecy while conducting operations that could influence international relations, had refined my ability to maintain emotional control under extreme stress while sharpening my focus on mission-critical priorities. My family interpreted these changes as evidence that military service was fundamentally damaging my capacity for normal human relationships and emotional connection. They had spent months planning what they described as a family discussion about my future, but which I quickly recognized as a carefully orchestrated attempt to pressure me into abandoning naval service. The conversation began during Friday evening dinner, when my mother raised concerns about my apparent emotional distance and lack of interest in civilian social activities that had previously provided shared family experiences. "Sarah, we're worried about you. You seem so isolated, so focused on this military work that you don't have room in your life for anything else that matters." My sister Amanda had prepared specific talking points about the personal costs of military service that she believed I was too immersed in naval culture to recognize objectively. "You're 32 years old, Sarah. Most women your age are building families, establishing careers that allow for work-life balance, creating relationships that provide emotional support and stability. You're sacrificing everything that makes life meaningful for this military obsession." David approached the issue from a financial perspective, questioning whether naval service provided adequate compensation and advancement opportunities compared to civilian alternatives that could utilize my analytical skills and leadership experience. "I've researched career opportunities for people with your background and security clearances. Defense contractors, consulting firms, and government agencies offer positions that would double your current salary while allowing you to live a normal life." Even my father, whose military career had been the foundation for everything I understood about duty and service, expressed concerns about the direction my naval career was taking. His perspective was particularly painful because it came from genuine understanding of military demands rather than civilian misunderstanding of military culture. "Sarah, I'm proud of your achievements and your dedication to service. Your advancement through naval intelligence has been impressive, and I know the quality of work you're performing even if I can't know the details. But I'm concerned about the personal costs you're accepting for professional advancement. Military service should enhance your life, not consume it entirely." The family intervention continued throughout the weekend, with each member presenting arguments designed to convince me that transitioning to civilian career would provide better long-term prospects for personal happiness, financial security, and family relationships. They had researched specific job opportunities, prepared financial analyses comparing military and civilian compensation, and developed detailed arguments about the social and psychological benefits of civilian life. Their presentation was thorough, well-intentioned, and fundamentally based on assumptions about personal fulfillment that contradicted everything I had learned about meaningful work and service to larger purposes. They viewed my naval career as a phase of personal development that should eventually give way to more conventional life choices focused on individual happiness and family obligations. My response revealed the extent to which military service had become central to my identity in ways that civilian alternatives could never replicate. The intellectual challenges of intelligence analysis, the knowledge that my work protected American interests and prevented international conflicts, and the opportunity to serve with highly capable people on complex operations, provided satisfaction that financial compensation and social acceptance could not match. I understand your concerns, and I appreciate that they come from love and genuine worry about my future, I told them during Sunday morning breakfast, when the intervention reached its climactic moment. But you're asking me to abandon work that provides purpose and meaning in ways that civilian careers cannot replicate. Naval intelligence isn't just what I do for employment, it's who I am and what I believe makes life worth living. My mother's response made clear that my family's patience with my military career had reached its limit. Sarah, you're choosing abstract principles over real relationships with people who love you. You're prioritizing strangers and government objectives over family members who have supported you throughout your life. That's not dedication to duty. That's selfishness disguised as patriotism. The accusation of selfishness was particularly devastating because it revealed how completely my family misunderstood the sacrifices that effective military service required. They interpreted my commitment to protecting others as self-centered career advancement, my dedication to preventing international conflicts as emotional avoidance of family responsibilities. David delivered what amounted to the family's ultimatum with clinical precision that reflected his accounting background. Sarah, we've given you time to get this military phase out of your system, but it's clear that naval service is preventing you from developing the relationships and experiences that would provide genuine long-term happiness. You need to choose between continued military advancement and maintaining connections with family members who care about your well-being. Amanda reinforced the ultimatum with emotional appeals designed to highlight everything I would lose by continuing naval service. If you keep prioritizing military career over family relationships, you're going to end up alone and isolated when you're too old for active duty. We won't always be available to provide the support network you're going to need when this military fantasy ends. Even my father, despite his military background and understanding of service obligations, supported the family position with reluctant agreement. Sarah, your naval achievements have been exceptional, and your service has made genuine contributions to national security. But continued advancement will require accepting assignments and responsibilities that will further separate you from family relationships that provide emotional foundation for long-term happiness. The moment of choice had arrived with crystal clarity that eliminated any possibility of compromise or delayed decision. My family was offering continued relationship and support in exchange for abandoning the naval career that provided meaning and purpose beyond individual happiness. They wanted me to choose between military service and family acceptance. My response was delivered with the same controlled voice that 6 months of submarine duty had reinforced through countless high-pressure situations. I choose naval service. The work I'm performing protects American interests and prevents conflicts that would affect millions of people, including family members who question its value. I cannot abandon responsibilities that serve purposes larger than individual comfort or social approval. The silence that followed lasted approximately 30 seconds, during which I could observe my family processing the reality that their intervention had failed completely. Their disappointment was profound and genuinely painful to witness, but the choice had been forced upon me in terms that allowed no middle ground. My mother was the first to respond, with words that would define our relationship for the remaining 2 years of my father's life. If that's your decision, Sarah, then you've chosen your priorities. Don't expect us to support choices that prioritize military career over family relationships. You're welcome in our home when you decide to rejoin the family, but not before. I left Phoenix that Sunday afternoon understanding that I had lost my family's support permanently unless I abandoned everything that gave my life meaning and purpose. The drive to the airport provided time to process the magnitude of what had been sacrificed for military service, but also to recognize that no alternative choice would have been compatible with the values and sense of duty that my father had ironically instilled in me during childhood. The point of no return had been reached, and there would be no possibility of reconciliation without abandoning the naval career that had become inseparable from my identity and understanding of meaningful contribution to purposes larger than individual happiness. The 18 months following my family's ultimatum became the most professionally demanding and personally isolating period of my naval career, as the combination of family estrangement and evolving security threats created challenges that tested my resilience in ways that combat operations had never required. My assignment to the Joint Intelligence Analysis Center at Dam Neck, Virginia, represented a significant advancement in responsibility and security clearance levels, but it also meant accepting work that would make any reconciliation with my family practically impossible. The facility operated under classification levels so high that acknowledging its existence violated federal law, and my daily responsibilities involved analyzing intelligence that could influence presidential decision-making in international relations. The psychological adjustment to complete family estrangement was complicated by work demands that required maintaining analytical objectivity and emotional stability, while processing intelligence about threats that could affect millions of civilian lives. The compartmentalization skills that naval training had developed proved essential for maintaining operational effectiveness, despite personal grief and social isolation that affected every aspect of daily life. My new supervisor, Captain Elena Rodriguez, was a career intelligence officer with 20 years of experience in the most sensitive areas of naval operations. Her first assessment of my capabilities occurred during a briefing on Chinese naval expansion in the South China Sea, where my analysis of satellite imagery and communication intercepts revealed strategic patterns that had been missed by previous analysts. "Mitchell, your threat assessment methodology is exceptional, but I need to know whether you can maintain this level of performance under extended pressure," Captain Rodriguez said during my initial evaluation. "The work we're doing here will test your psychological resilience as much as your analytical capabilities. Personal problems that affect operational judgment will be identified quickly and addressed through reassignment if necessary." Her warning proved prophetic, as the demands of analyzing global intelligence while coping with family rejection created stress levels that required conscious effort to maintain professional standards. The absence of personal support systems became particularly pronounced during crisis periods, when intelligence analysis required 18-hour days and constant readiness for emergency situations that could develop without warning. The first major test of my emotional stability under operational pressure came during a North Korean missile crisis that required continuous intelligence analysis for 6 weeks. Satellite surveillance had detected unusual activity at launch facilities that suggested preparation for intercontinental ballistic missile tests capable of reaching American territory. My responsibility involved analyzing communication intercepts and movement patterns to assess the probability of actual launch versus psychological warfare designed to influence international negotiations. The analysis required combining technical intelligence with psychological assessment of North Korean leadership decision-making under international pressure. My reports were briefed directly to the Secretary of Defense and used to inform presidential decisions about military readiness and diplomatic responses that could prevent or escalate toward military confrontation. Working alone in a classified facility with no external communication allowed for crisis periods created a form of professional isolation that was intensified by the absence of family relationships that could have provided emotional support during high-stress operations. The knowledge that my analysis could influence decisions affecting millions of lives carried psychological weight that was difficult to manage without personal connections outside the intelligence community. The successful resolution of the North Korean crisis, which concluded without missile launches or military escalation, validated my analytical methodology and earned recognition from senior officials who understood the strategic importance of accurate intelligence assessment. However, the personal cost of maintaining operational effectiveness during extended crisis periods was becoming unsustainable without emotional support systems that civilian relationships typically provided. My promotion to lieutenant commander, which occurred 6 months after the family intervention, represented recognition of exceptional performance, but also meant accepting assignments that would require even greater security restrictions and personal sacrifice. The advancement ceremony was attended only by military colleagues, marking the first significant professional milestone in my career that occurred without family participation or acknowledgement. The isolation was compounded by security requirements that prevented forming meaningful relationships with civilian personnel, who lacked appropriate clearances to understand the nature of my work or the pressures associated with intelligence analysis at strategic levels. Dating became practically impossible due to background investigation requirements for anyone seeking close relationships with personnel possessing top-secret clearances. Professional relationships within the intelligence community provided some compensation for family estrangement, but military colleagues faced their own operational pressures and security restrictions that limited emotional support and personal connection. The institutional culture of naval intelligence emphasized individual resilience and compartmentalization that discouraged extensive discussion of personal challenges or psychological difficulties. The second major crisis that tested my professional capabilities while highlighting personal isolation involved Iranian naval activities in the Persian Gulf that threatened international shipping lanes and regional stability. Intelligence indicated that Iranian Revolutionary Guard forces were preparing asymmetric warfare tactics that could disrupt global oil supplies and provoke international military response. My analysis of Iranian communication patterns and tactical preparations required coordinating with intelligence services from allied nations while maintaining operational security that prevented discussing work details with anyone outside the immediate analytical team. The complexity of international intelligence sharing while analyzing threats that could affect global economic stability created intellectual challenges that were both professionally fulfilling and psychologically exhausting. The Iranian crisis extended over 4 months and required constant readiness for intelligence developments that could change rapidly based on political decisions made in Tehran, Washington, and allied capitals. My daily routine involved analyzing overnight intelligence reports, briefing senior officials on threat developments, and participating in secure video conferences with international partners who provided additional intelligence and coordination for potential military responses. The resolution of the Iranian crisis through diplomatic negotiations rather than military confrontation demonstrated the value of accurate intelligence analysis in preventing conflicts that could have resulted in significant casualties and regional destabilization. However, the successful outcome provided professional satisfaction that could not compensate for the personal emptiness that resulted from having no family members to share achievements with or to provide emotional support during stressful periods. The third year following family estrangement brought assignment to an even more classified program that required relocating to the underground facility in Nevada, where I would eventually receive news of my father's death. The transition to deep underground operations represented the pinnacle of naval intelligence career advancement, but also marked complete separation from surface world activities and relationships that provided normal human connection. The psychological challenges of extended underground assignment were unprecedented in my experience and required developing coping strategies that went beyond traditional military resilience training. The absence of natural light, limited contact with surface personnel, and constant focus on global threats created a form of professional and personal isolation that tested mental health in ways that previous assignments had not approached. Physical fitness routines that had previously provided stress relief and psychological stability became mechanical exercises performed in underground facilities that lacked the emotional restoration that outdoor activities could provide. Reading and continuing education activities that had been sources of intellectual stimulation became methods for avoiding confrontation with the magnitude of personal sacrifice that career advancement had required. The realization that professional success was creating psychological and social isolation that might be irreversible forced consideration of whether continued naval advancement was sustainable without support systems that most people considered essential for long-term mental health and emotional stability. The question that haunted this period was whether meaningful work could justify complete separation from family relationships and normal human connections. The answer would come during my father's final illness, when the convergence of personal grief and professional responsibility would create the most challenging situation of my entire career, ultimately leading to choices that would define my understanding of duty, sacrifice, and what truly mattered when everything else was stripped away. The call that would change everything came not through official military channels, but through a secure message that bypassed every protocol I had established for maintaining operational security during deep underground assignment. At 0347 hours on a Monday morning, while I was analyzing terrorist financing patterns that spanned from Karachi to Caracas, my personal emergency beacon activated with a priority override that indicated immediate family crisis. The message was from my father's longtime friend and former Army colleague, Colonel Marcus Webb, who had maintained contact with our family despite my estrangement. His words were precise and urgent. "Sarah, your father suffered a massive heart attack 6 hours ago at Phoenix General Hospital. He's in critical condition. Doctors estimate 48 to 72 hours maximum. Your family doesn't know I'm contacting you, but Jim asked me years ago to reach you if something like this happened. He never stopped hoping you would come home." The intelligence operation I was leading had reached a critical juncture, where terrorist financial networks were transferring assets that could fund multiple coordinated attacks across European targets. My team had spent 8 months developing sources and tracking money flows that would disappear within hours if surveillance was interrupted. The timing of my father's crisis could not have been worse from an operational perspective, yet the possibility of losing him without reconciliation created a psychological emergency that threatened my ability to maintain analytical focus. I immediately requested emergency extraction to Phoenix, knowing that leaving the underground facility would compromise months of intelligence work and potentially allow terrorist financing to proceed undetected. Admiral Torres understood the implications but approved my request based on her assessment that losing a parent during active operations could cause psychological damage that would affect long-term operational effectiveness. "Mitchell, you have 72 hours, she said during the emergency briefing that preceded my extraction. "We'll maintain operational continuity with backup personnel, but understand that leaving now means accepting responsibility for intelligence gaps that could have significant consequences. Are you prepared for that level of professional and personal risk?" The question forced immediate evaluation of competing loyalties that military service had never required me to navigate simultaneously. My duty to ongoing operations that protected civilian lives conflicted directly with the desire to reconcile with my father before his death, creating an ethical dilemma that had no clear precedent in naval training or personal experience. "Admiral, I accept full responsibility for the operational and personal consequences of emergency leave," I responded, knowing that my decision could affect both terrorist prevention efforts and family relationships that had been damaged beyond repair. "I request permission to attempt reconciliation with my father, while maintaining readiness to return if operational developments require immediate resumption of duties." The 8-hour journey from the Nevada facility to Phoenix General Hospital provided time to process emotions that 3 years of compartmentalization had suppressed, while simultaneously preparing for family confrontations that could be even more devastating than my father's approaching death. The possibility that my siblings would prevent hospital access or that my father might be unconscious created scenarios that required psychological preparation for complete failure and additional rejection. Phoenix General's cardiac intensive care unit represented a civilian medical environment that felt alien after years of military facilities and underground operations. The sounds, smells, and emotional atmosphere of civilian crisis management contrasted sharply with the controlled environment of military medical facilities, creating sensory overload that required conscious effort to process without becoming overwhelmed by unfamiliar stimulation. My father's condition was worse than Colonel Webb's message had indicated. Cardiologists explained that the massive heart attack had caused extensive damage to cardiac muscle, creating multiple complications that made recovery unlikely, even with aggressive intervention. The medical team estimated that consciousness periods would be brief and unpredictable, leaving uncertain opportunities for final conversations that could provide closure or reconciliation. My arrival at the hospital created immediate family tension that threatened to prevent access to my father's bedside. David and Amanda had established themselves as primary medical decision-makers, and initially refused to acknowledge my presence or my legal right as next of kin to participate in treatment discussions. Their hostility was intensified by the dramatic nature of my appearance after years of underground assignment. "You can't just show up here after 3 years of choosing military career over family and expect to be involved in medical decisions," Amanda said during our confrontation in the hospital corridor. "Dad has been heartbroken about your absence, and now you want to ease your conscience by appearing at the last minute?" David's response was even more direct and personally devastating. "Sarah, your presence here is creating additional stress for Mom at the worst possible time. Dad is dying, and your military obligations have prevented you from being part of our support system throughout his illness. We appreciate that you've come back, but please don't complicate his final hours with guilt trips and emotional drama." The accusation that my presence would cause additional family stress rather than provide comfort revealed how completely our relationships had deteriorated during the years of estrangement. They viewed my return not as an opportunity for reconciliation, but as a selfish intrusion that prioritized my emotional needs over collective family welfare during a medical crisis. My mother's reaction was the most painful, because it reflected genuine grief compounded by years of anger about my military career choices. "Sarah, I'm glad you're here, but I don't know if this is what Jim would want. He spent the past 3 years talking about you, worrying about you, wondering if your military service was worth losing your family. I don't know if seeing you now will provide comfort or cause more pain." The possibility that my presence might increase my father's suffering rather than provide opportunity for reconciliation created an emotional complexity that military training had never prepared me to navigate. The desire to see him one final time conflicted with family assessments that my appearance could cause additional stress during his most vulnerable moments. The resolution came when my father experienced a brief period of consciousness during which he specifically requested to see me privately. The medical team confirmed that his mental clarity was temporary but sufficient for coherent conversation, providing a narrow window for the reconciliation that both of us had needed for 3 years. His appearance shocked me more than battlefield casualties I had witnessed during combat deployments. The robust Army officer who had taught me about duty and strategic thinking had been reduced to a frail figure sustained by machines that monitored every biological function. Yet his eyes retained the intelligence and moral clarity that had shaped my understanding of meaningful service and personal integrity. "Sarah, I'm proud of what you've accomplished," he said with the controlled voice that required enormous effort but carried absolute conviction. "Your naval service has exceeded my highest expectations, and I understand now that the values I taught you required you to choose duty over family comfort. I never stopped believing in your judgment, even when I questioned your decisions." His words provided the validation I had needed throughout years of family rejection and professional isolation. The man whose military example had inspired my naval career was acknowledging that my service represented the natural extension of principles he had instilled during childhood, rather than a betrayal of family priorities. "Dad, I'm sorry that duty has separated us from each other, but I needed you to know that everything I've achieved has been built on the foundation you provided," I responded, understanding that this conversation would be our final opportunity for complete honesty about military service and its personal costs. "I know, Sarah, and I want you to understand that your mother and siblings love you, but they've never understood what military service demands from people who take it seriously. They see sacrifice as loss, rather than investment in purposes larger than individual happiness." Our conversation lasted only 12 minutes before his condition deteriorated and consciousness faded permanently. However, those 12 minutes provided mutual understanding and forgiveness that reconciled our relationship, even as it confirmed that my military career would continue to separate me from family members who could never fully appreciate the nature of my service. He died 6 hours later while I was maintaining vigil beside his bedside, with David and Amanda choosing to remain in the hospital waiting room rather than share his final moments with me. My mother stayed long enough to witness his death before leaving to make funeral arrangements that would exclude me from participating in public ceremonies that honored his military service. The text message that would define the ultimate cost of my naval career arrived while I was completing paperwork for his military burial benefits at Arlington National Cemetery. David's message was brief and final. Family had decided that my presence would complicate the funeral with other military guests who had known my father throughout his Army career. The irony was absolute and devastating. I was being excluded from my father's military funeral because my family believed my military service would somehow dishonor his memory or create complications with military personnel who had served with him. The funeral arrangements revealed the final misunderstanding that would cost me the opportunity to honor my father publicly, while demonstrating to my family the true nature of the military service they had never understood or appreciated. I stood in the shadows behind a granite monument bearing the names of soldiers who had died in Vietnam, watching from a distance of exactly 200 meters as my family gathered around my father's flag-draped casket at Arlington National Cemetery. The irony of my position was not lost on me. I was hiding behind a memorial to military sacrifice while being excluded from honoring the man who had taught me everything I understood about duty and service. The funeral had been moved from Phoenix to Arlington after my father's former commanding officer, General Patricia Hayes, had personally intervened to ensure that Captain James Mitchell received full military honors at the nation's most prestigious military cemetery. What my family didn't understand was that this decision had been influenced by my own service record, not just my father's 25 years of distinguished Army service. From my concealed position, I could observe the military precision of the honor guard preparation while watching my family interact with military guests who had traveled from across the country to pay respects to my father. The scene was both heartbreaking and surreal. I was witnessing my father's final military ceremony while being treated as an unwelcome intruder, whose presence would somehow dishonor his memory. My mother, dressed in black and supported by David and Amanda, appeared fragile but composed as she accepted condolences from military personnel who had served with my father throughout his career. Retired generals, former intelligence colleagues, and soldiers whose careers had been influenced by my father's leadership formed a gathering that represented decades of military service and shared dedication to national security. The most painful aspect of observing from a distance was recognizing several military personnel whose own careers had intersected with mine in ways that my family could never comprehend. Colonel Sarah Chen from Defense Intelligence Agency had worked with me on counterterrorism operations in Southeast Asia. Admiral Robert Morrison had personally commended my analysis during the Iranian crisis. Captain Michael Torres, Admiral Torres's brother, had served as my direct supervisor during submarine operations that my family knew nothing about. These officers were attending my father's funeral not only to honor his service, but because they understood the connection between his military values and my own naval achievements. Their presence represented recognition of a military legacy that spanned 2 generations, though my family interpreted their attendance as validation of my father's service despite what they considered my disappointing career choices. At exactly 1,400 hours, the funeral ceremony began with military precision that reflected the highest standards of Arlington National Cemetery protocol. The honor guard approached my father's casket with movements that had been rehearsed countless times but never lost their solemn dignity and emotional impact. Each step, each gesture, each element of the ceremony represented respect for military service and sacrifice that transcended individual personalities or family conflicts. The chaplain's opening remarks emphasized my father's dedication to duty, his intelligence expertise, and his influence on younger military personnel who had learned from his example. The words were both generic and specific, honoring his service while avoiding personal details that would reveal the complex family dynamics surrounding his funeral. As the ceremony progressed, I noticed increasing activity among the honor guard personnel that seemed unusual for standard military funeral protocol. Additional officers were arriving and positioning themselves in formation patterns that exceeded normal requirements for a retired captain's burial service. The expanding military presence suggested that someone with higher rank or special significance was being honored, though my family appeared unaware of the developing situation. The first indication that something extraordinary was occurring came when a Navy staff car arrived with flags indicating the presence of flag rank personnel. Admiral Rebecca Torres emerged from the vehicle wearing a dress blue uniform with decorations that immediately drew attention from military guests and civilian attendees. Her presence at my father's funeral would have been unexplainable without understanding her professional relationship with me and her assessment of my military contributions. Admiral Torres approached my mother with the formal dignity that senior military officers employed during official condolence visits. Their conversation was brief, but appeared to involve information that surprised my mother and created visible confusion among my siblings. David and Amanda exchanged glances that suggested they were receiving information that contradicted their understanding of family circumstances. The second dramatic development occurred when the honor guard formation expanded to include personnel from multiple service branches representing joint operations and intelligence cooperation. Marines, Army Rangers, Air Force Intelligence, and Navy SEALs took positions around my father's casket in a display of inter-service respect that normally occurred only for general officers or personnel who had made extraordinary contributions to national security. My family's confusion was evident as they observed military honors that exceeded their expectations and seemed disproportionate to my father's rank and service record. They began asking questions of military guests who provided answers that clearly challenged their understanding of why such elaborate honors were being rendered for a retired Army captain. The climactic moment arrived when Admiral Torres requested permission to address the gathering before the traditional flag-folding ceremony. Her remarks would reveal information that would forever change my family's understanding of military service, personal sacrifice, and the daughter they had rejected. Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered today to honor Captain James Mitchell, whose 25 years of distinguished Army service contributed significantly to American intelligence capabilities and national security. Admiral Torres began, using the formal tone reserved for official military communications. However, It is also appropriate to recognize that Captain Mitchell's greatest contribution to national security may have been his influence on a daughter whose own military achievements have exceeded even his distinguished example. Her words created immediate attention among military guests who understood the significance of her statement, while generating visible shock among my family members. Commander Sarah Mitchell, United States Navy, currently serves in one of the most classified and strategically important positions in American intelligence operations. Her analysis has prevented international conflicts, her leadership has disrupted global terrorist networks, and her dedication has earned recognition at the highest levels of national security leadership. The revelation that I held the rank of commander rather than the lieutenant rank my family had assumed created immediate understanding among military guests, while generating profound shock among my siblings and mother. They had excluded me from the funeral, believing I was a junior officer whose presence would embarrass them among senior military personnel. Admiral Torres continued with information that would demonstrate the magnitude of their misunderstanding. Commander Mitchell's work analyzing Chinese naval expansion has influenced presidential decision-making regarding Pacific strategy. Her intelligence assessment of North Korean missile capabilities prevented military escalation that could have resulted in significant casualties. Her analysis of Iranian naval activities contributed to diplomatic solutions that avoided regional conflict. The military personnel attending the funeral recognized these achievements as extraordinary accomplishments that warranted the expanded honor guard presence and inter-service representation. My family was processing the realization that they had rejected a daughter whose military service exceeded their father's achievements, and whose dedication to duty had earned respect at the highest levels of American defense leadership. The final revelation came when Admiral Torres announced that the funeral honors were being rendered not only for my father's service, but in recognition of a military family whose combined contributions to national security justified the exceptional ceremony they were witnessing. The Mitchell family represents 2 generations of intelligence excellence and dedication to protecting American interests through professional competence and personal sacrifice. Today we honor both Captain James Mitchell's distinguished service and the ongoing contributions of Commander Sarah Mitchell, whose work continues to protect the freedom and security that allows us to gather here in peace. The flag-folding ceremony that followed was performed with precision that acknowledged both my father's service and my own military achievements. The folded flag was presented to my mother with words that honored our family's combined military legacy rather than individual service records. As the ceremony concluded and military guests began approaching my family to offer condolences, the conversations revealed the extent of my naval accomplishments and the respect I had earned among senior defense personnel. Officers who had worked with me described operations and achievements that my family had never known existed, painting a picture of military service that contradicted everything they had believed about my career choices. Colonel Chen approached my mother with information that would complete the transformation of their understanding. Mrs. Mitchell, your daughter Sarah is one of the most capable intelligence officers of her generation. Her work has saved thousands of lives and prevented conflicts that would have affected millions of people. The entire intelligence community considers her service exceptional. Admiral Morrison reinforced this assessment with specific details about operations I had led and recognition I had received from senior leadership. Commander Mitchell's analysis has been briefed to the Secretary of Defense and the President of the United States. Her contributions to national security will influence American strategy for decades to come. The weight of these revelations created a family crisis that exceeded even my father's death. My mother, David, and Amanda were forced to confront the reality that they had rejected a daughter whose military achievements exceeded their understanding and whose service had earned recognition at the highest levels of American government. As military guests departed and my family remained beside my father's grave, I emerged from my concealed position to face the consequences of choices that had separated us for 3 years. The woman they had excluded from the funeral was not the disappointing daughter they had imagined, but a senior military officer whose dedication to duty had earned respect throughout the defense community. My mother's first words revealed the magnitude of her shock and regret. Sarah, we didn't know, we believed your military service was preventing you from building a normal life. We never understood what you were actually accomplishing. David's response demonstrated his struggle to reconcile his assumptions about my career with the reality that senior military officers had just described. Sarah, Why didn't you ever tell us about these achievements? Why did you let us believe you were wasting your life on meaningless military assignments? The answer was both simple and complex. Security clearances had prevented discussing specific operations, but more fundamentally, I had chosen to accept family rejection rather than violate operational security to prove my worth. The values my father had taught me about duty and sacrifice had required accepting personal costs that included losing family relationships. Because, I said, looking at my father's headstone and then at family members who were seeing me clearly for the first time in years, Dad taught me that the most important service is often invisible, that the greatest achievements are sometimes classified, and that doing the right thing sometimes means accepting misunderstanding from people you love most. The reconciliation that followed was painful, gradual, and incomplete. My family's newfound respect for my military service couldn't erase 3 years of rejection and mutual misunderstanding. However, my father's funeral had revealed truths that would allow us to rebuild relationships based on accurate understanding rather than assumptions and disappointment. As we left Arlington National Cemetery together, walking past memorials to thousands of military personnel whose service had required similar sacrifices, I understood that my father's final gift had been orchestrating circumstances that would reveal to our family the true meaning of duty, honor, and service to purposes larger than individual comfort. The daughter they had cast aside was the same person who had always existed, someone whose dedication to protecting others had earned recognition at the highest levels of American leadership, someone whose service had prevented conflicts and saved lives, someone whose commitment to duty represented the natural fulfillment of values that my father had instilled during childhood. The shadows of Arlington National Cemetery had hidden me during my father's funeral, but they had also concealed the truth about sacrifice, service, and what it truly means to honor the memory of someone who dedicated his life to protecting others. In the end, the honor guard had revealed not just my military rank, but the real meaning of the legacy my father had left for both his family and his country. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.